So let me introduce our special guest today. I can see there's already well over 100 of you who have joined the call. It's Lee Rowley. He was a Conservative Member of Parliament from 2017 until the last general election as the MP for North East Derbyshire. A notable achievement when he won that seat. It was the first time the Conservatives held it since 1935. He also substantially increased his majority at the 2019 general election. In 2020, he was made a deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, and he held ministerial office between 2001 and 2004 under Prime Ministers Johnson, Truss and Sunak. More pertinently for us here today, Lee ran his leadership campaign in 2022, which I guess really put her on the map. And again in 2024, he sadly lost his seat in 2024. We lost, of course, 2/3 of our seats, lots of great Conservative MPs. But since November 2024 and Kemi's triumph in the leadership election, he has been Kemi's Chief of Staff, and it's in that capacity that we invited him here today. He's much more than the enforcer of Kemi's will. It's widely agreed that he imposed a business-like structure on Kemi's leadership, and he has his own very clear views about the direction the Conservatives must take under Kemi's leadership and the steps required to regain the trust of the people and win the next election. Could be plain sailing, I would have thought. Lee, how are you? Really good to have you with us.
Good to see you, Mark. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for joining today.
Let's sort of start off with your thoughts on a pen picture of where we're at the moment, Lee. I mean, the Labour government had the shortest honeymoon of any government ever elected, I think, and have plummeted somewhat in the opinion polls. In the last few days, Reform have decided to engage in a civil war, which I think for those who are on the outside, is almost impossible to work out what the hell's going on there. But there's certainly been an implosion in Reform. Nobody ever hears from the Liberal Democrats. I mean, you can put your feet up, can't you? It's going to be plain sailing from here, isn't it?
Very good. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much to PopCon for letting me come today, and thank you to everybody for joining. I know you have lots of things you could do on a Monday, but grateful for you spending your time here. If only we could put our feet up, but we're absolutely not doing that. There's a very broad discussion going on in the party about how to do things, when to do it, and in what order. And part of the reason for me coming today is to hear your views. But I think the one thing which hopefully we'd all agree on is that politics is extremely volatile at the moment. And that volatility has been shown both in what we've achieved and not achieved as a party over the years. You know, we've been as high as 50-something%, I think, in various parts of the early stages of COVID, 9% of the election of the vote at the last Euro elections, and then obviously the failure of last July. And you can see, within a matter of weeks, people riding high, organisations and people riding high, and then going down low. So the job of the Conservative Party, as set by Kemi, and as the team around her, including me, are trying to do now, is to try to not ignore that stuff. That's politics. You know, we're politicians. We're politicians. We have to accept that, reflect it, respond to it, and try and work through it. But it's also to recognise that there's a very long-term job to do here, which is to win back the trust of the British people, and then hopefully to be successful in 2029.
So let's sort of rewind a bit, Lee, because I think that, although we've had obviously now months to digest it, the 2024 general election, might not have been that much of a surprise. I mean, I'm actually saying, well, it was really a tragedy that good MPs like yourself lost your seats. But I can remember with my PopCon colleagues sort of watching as the exit poll came in, and weirdly enough, almost breathing a sigh of relief that we were going to get as many as 121 MPs. But obviously, in any historical context, it's an absolute shellacking. I mean, pretty much the worst result for the Conservatives since democracy in any meaningful form began. What's your take and the take of the leadership for sort of what went so abysmally wrong, from a majority of 85 years previously to losing 2/3 of our seats? Was it just we sort of run out of gas in government? Was it too many changes of leader? What made the British public fall not just out of love with us, but determined to give us an absolute kicking at the first opportunity that they had?
I think it's pretty simple. We forgot who we were, and as you know, that covers all manner of sins. But from what we were doing, what we were focusing on, what was acceptable, what wasn't, the policies which we were bringing forward, the contradictions within them. We ended up in a place where we didn't know what we were as a Conservative Party, and some of that was unfortunate, but explainable. That there were leadership changes because of disagreements on policy. Some of it was just, not acceptable. And there's no point in soft-soaping it. I mean, we don't want to self-flagellate, but there's no point in soft-soaping it. We failed, and the electorate were very clear that we had failed. So we're not going to debate that with the electorate. We're going to accept that they made a very clear statement that the Conservative Party needed a time to itself for a while, and we're going to use that time well to try and when the time comes, give the people of this country a real Conservative alternative. It wasn't unexpected that I lost. I was very sad about it. It was my home. It's where I grew up, my neighbours, my friends, my family, all there. And it was very sad not to have the privilege to represent North East Derbyshire in Parliament, but it wasn't unexpected. And, when I went round and knocked on doors and asked people, by the end of it, I was sort of asking them to vote in spite of me being a Conservative rather than because I was a Conservative. And we cannot ever allow that to happen again. There is, the Conservative Party and the Conservative movement and the Conservative tradition with a small c as well as a big C. That is a hugely beneficial thing to our society and our community and our country over hundreds of years. And we've got to get back to being proud to be Conservatives again. That's going to take time to get there, but that's the mission.
So Jim Sutcliffe asks, is it time to start defending our record in government? You seem to be saying no. That would be almost having an argument with the electorate. The electorate can never be wrong. We've got to be a bit more honest that we got it wrong, but presumably to sort of explain why as well. I mean, Kemi's very good at saying we're under new leadership, we got things wrong. She's not saying it was the most brilliant period of any government in her lifetime. What's the explanation we give to the electorate about why it went so horribly wrong, do you think?
So Kemi's theory, which is 22,000 words long in a pamphlet called Conservatism in Crisis, is that there are actually lots of good things that were done over 14 years, and we're not going to trash our record. I think we can be proud of many things that we did around education. Got some of the big calls right. We have hundreds of thousands of kids going through better schools, which the Labour Party are in the process of wrecking, but hundreds of thousands of kids going through better schools as a result of the reforms that were undertaken by successive education secretaries. But the reality is that we only have so much time to talk to the electorate, and the electorate were very clear last year that that's it, your time's up, go away, think again. And so our job is to do that and to build upon the areas where we're strong as Conservatives, but also to get back to the principles that we believe in as Conservatives, things that got me into the party 25 years ago and why I'm still sticking around in the party in this role as a member and things like that. So it is a question of time. It's a question of how much time you have to talk to people, but it's also a question of a function of reflecting that they've made a choice and we all have our own individual views, and often that's very difficult. I was, I as you say, Mark, I served in government. I think some of the stuff I did in government was good, but the reality is that a line's being drawn, and people want to look for. Most of the time, electorates want to look forward, and so we have to tell them why conservatism will make a difference in their lives in the 2030s, and why it will get us out of the hole that Labour are going to put us in, as opposed to debating whether this thing or that thing was good in 2015.
As you'll probably know, Lee, the kind of basic analysis that PopCon put forward is that a major reason for our ultimate failure, although we did win 4 elections in a row, effectively a long stretch in government, was that the governmental infrastructure of the UK that we inherited when we came in 2010, albeit in coalition, it pushes against a lot of Conservative ends. It doesn't mean you can't achieve anything, but the quangocracy and a whole swath of legislation around the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, the growth of quangos, power being given to sort of technical experts rather than apparently being in the hands of the minister. And generally speaking, this sort of quangocracy and bureaucracy doesn't tend to be particularly sympathetic, I would argue, to conservative principles. How much is that analysis shared by Kemi and the leadership team at the top? She often talks about the need to rewire Britain. Seems to me that's pretty much the first thing that a Conservative government would do as and when we get the opportunity to return to office.
Yeah, I think we share much, or we might say it in a different way, but we share much of that analysis. There is the need to fundamentally rewire the state. The state is no longer working. It's no longer working for the good people who rely upon it. It's not really working for the people who work for it. And it's clearly not working in terms of the levers which the electorate endorsed to be pulled at a general election, not being able to be pulled either at all in some instances or quickly enough in many other instances. And but the question is how you do that. And and one of the discussions we're having in the party is, party is a broad church, but I think most people would accept that there is an issue. There are issues with how government works. The question is how you do the deep analysis to work out how to make it work again. And the Labour Party are having this problem at the moment. I remember going to a dinner with some Labour people this time last year. And realizing about 5 minutes into the dinner, because I didn't know the Labour Party people were going to be there, but basically they put together a group of people to sort of find out how through an independent person how government works. And so I went into my standard spiel of well, this isn't effective, this doesn't work, this process takes too long, this thing is slowing us down, etc., etc. And the Labour guys' eyes all glazed over. They were completely disinterested in this. They just thought that if you just replace the ministers with nice people, with people with red rosettes on, that everything would be fine. And they're actually now seeing that that's not the case. That doesn't mean that, government, we don't talk in like these kind of like very histrionic phrases that, everything's broken and everything's terrible and all the rest of it, because I don't think it is helpful. But the reality is there are some fundamental issues. There's nothing in principle wrong with quangos when they were set up back in the, whenever it was, 80s, 90s, that you took an activity of government and you said, let's give it to a group of people outside of government to run as efficiently as it possibly can do. That principle is okay. But what that's actually turned into is that large swathes of government have been taken out of the democratic accountability of ministers and of parliament who represent the people. Unacceptable. They've gained a life of their own in certain instances by saying, well, actually, you want to do this? Well, actually, we want to do that, or we want to do it in this way or the other way. And if you have that democratic deficit over a sustained period of time, and the people don't feel like their will is being heard, that's just, that's fundamentally strikes at the heart of democracy. And so, rewiring the state is going to have to be part necessarily of any future Conservative manifesto in order to deliver the Conservative principles that we're all here for.
Yeah, my take on it is the sort of what works, and I wouldn't have an objection to, is what used to be called contracting out. The government's decided a particular policy. It doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to, I don't know, employ the refuse collectors to pick up refuse. It might be that there's a refuse collection agency in the private sector or the voluntary sector or the charity sector that can step in and do things. But it's become policy making. I mean, just last week on sentence guidance, it seemed to completely flummox the Justice Secretary that this had come out of blue sky. I mean, my impression was over the dispatch box, she didn't know this guidance had been issued. That's surely a policy matter. You can't contract out that sort of stuff. You can have think tanks and advisors, flying kites and suggesting things, and that's all fine. But bang, this comes out. As I said, it's only my impression that she didn't really know about it. And you suddenly enshrine two-tier justice in sentencing. That was never the idea of contracting out, right?
Exactly. And there's sort of two things here. The first one is there are many parts of government, many parts of this process which work, but all institutions have to have a self-correcting mechanism. And there's just a larger number than previously who don't have a self-correcting mechanism. They think they have an independent actor role in themselves. And So you've got a group of people who are, in my view, are beyond their skis, and then you've got a group of people who are, sticking roughly within the paradigms, but they're not going as fast as the minister wants. And I'm not fussed whether that minister is blue, red, yellow, or whatever. I like it to be blue, but if the electorate have decided that the Labour Party should be in office, the Labour Party should have the ability to be able to enact their manifesto and then be held to account and be thrown out if they don't do it very well. It shouldn't be slowed down by this stuff. And I'll give you an example of when I was a minister. I tried to change a very, very, very minor part of the building regulations. I was part of a process of trying to change a very, very minor part of building regulations, which said that in the event of new builds or major refurbishment, there should be the provision of single-sex toilets. This doesn't seem hugely complicated, but it's a brilliant example of how lots of things interact with each other, in that you didn't used to have to codify common sense, and now you have to codify common sense because of progressivism and things like that. But putting that aside, that's an ideological question. So this process had been running, I think, for a year and a half before I became the minister. It was still running after I left being the minister a year and a half later. If we are in a place, and maybe you say it's the fault of the ministers, I don't know, but I pushed extremely hard to get this thing landed. If we're in a place where simple changes can take several years to get through, that is not an effective structure, particularly in a world where, by common consent, things are speeding up. The internet makes us think quicker and all the rest of it. So those are the kind of things that have to change, whoever is in government.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually even having a discussion with a former Labour minister from the Blair years who sort of was rather sniffy about this analysis and sort of said to me, but Mark, the point is, if the minister's determined enough and clever enough, he or she can usually get their own way. I said, well, that's not good enough. I mean, the idea that the minister should have to sort of pilot their way through landmines laid for them by the civil service or other elements of the bureaucracy, and that you need kind of the wisdom of Solomon and the strength of Hercules and God knows what else, a major dose of good luck to get something done. That is the sign of a truly broken system, whatever the merits or demerits of any particular policy you're trying to pilot through, right?
Yeah, I mean, I work with some genuinely, I work with some excellent civil servants over the 3 years I was a minister, and all credit to them. When I asked them to do stuff, they would do it quickly, and they would do it well. But there are challenges in that process, in that there's a group of people who sort of want to subtly insert their view into things. So, to the extent where occasionally you could sort of see them rolling their eyes on the Zoom call or whatever. And it's like, guys, if you want to make decisions, come over to this side of the fence, not on that side of the fence, right? We want your advice, we want your thoughts, we want your views, but ultimately politicians decide, civil servants enact. That was usually okay, but you got a little bit of that. And fundamentally, the whole premise has to be that that policies can be enacted for good or otherwise, not slowed down, not changed, and that the minister, I had a big portfolio. My last portfolio was housing and building safety, and I had a big portfolio, but it cannot get to the point where the minister effectively has to go hunting to work out where their requests have gone, or they have to sort of stand over to get that, because there's so much that comes through the hopper, so much that used to come through my box, that you just ran out of time at the end of the day to do stuff. And so it was that kind of, I'm not saying it was me that did it, but it was, we can't ask sort of like superhuman powers from ministers to be able to do everything that's thrown at them, and then remember the stuff they put in there beforehand, and remember the stuff that's got lost behind the sofa. Because if that's the case, then government doesn't work. And if government doesn't work, we should call it out and change it.
Yeah. Well, what's your audit, Lee, at the moment? I mean, my analysis seems to be about the same here. You've obviously got the advantage over me of having experienced it firsthand, but there seems to be a lot of overlap in our analysis of the problems in the present British governmental structure. Let's look at the Tory party, though, the Conservative Party itself. If you were giving the Conservative Party a health check at the moment, what would you say about it?
Well, in terms of its infrastructure, its organisation.
Well, everything. Its impact, its position in the opinion polls, the efficacy of its grassroots, the cut through it's having with the electorate, its media profile, all the sort of things that you could ask about any political party.
So you've got a set of short-term issues there and a set of long-term issues. On the short-term issues, there is a huge hunger, including by myself and including by my boss, the leader, to move as quickly as we possibly can do to try to respond and reflect the reality of July, and then to try and rebuild trust again. So in the short term, we're trying to do as much as we can on that. But there will be different views about how to sequence it, about what order to do it, at what frequency. Happy to talk about those to the extent I can. And I know people on the call will accept that there's certain things I can say and other stuff which I have to take away. But there's a sort of short-term balance of making sure people see that we're making progress. But the reality is that the aim is in 3-4 years' time. And that doesn't mean we're all going to sit on our hands. It doesn't mean we're going to go to the beach. It doesn't mean we're going to be lethargic. It doesn't mean we don't care. It means that now is the time to put the foundations in which will allow us to be successful in the future. And if we scrimp on those foundations, mixing my metaphors, if we don't put the foundations in properly, it creates greater risk later that we won't have the opportunity to be able to do the things that we want to do. Or even if we are successful, that we don't have the plan to actually change the country. So there is an element of just having to fix, I don't know, use the phrase fix the foundations, but that the equivalent of fix the foundations. But then there's a set of long-term stuff within there, Mark, that you were talking about. So, the decline of almost all mass membership electorates with, mass membership parties in the Western democracy, with sort of a few honourable exceptions, well, few semi-honourable exceptions on the left. And that's a long-term trend which has happened for most of my lifetime. We have to try and reverse it because you want people to buy into it, but they are very big, very existential questions, which are even everybody who may want us to go even faster on things would accept that it's going to take time. So we're trying to look at how we make as much progress we can in short term, but resolving some of these long-term questions as well.
So perhaps you can help us navigate this then, Lee, because as we understood it, at least from media reports, the idea, and you'll correct me where I get this wrong, but was sort of to stabilize the party in 2025, to restate some principles, to gain a hearing again, to start to sort of sketch out some policy, some positions perhaps in 2026, and start rolling out policy in 2027. And I think quite a lot of people involved in PopCon were like, that sounds too slow. Not that we need detailed policy now. It'd be ridiculous to write the manifesto now. But there must be things that we can sketch out now, some positions on some major issues that go a bit beyond conservative principles of whatever, national sovereignty and the freedom of the individual and pro-enterprise. So can you explain to us sort of what the present thinking is of the leadership, of what gets rolled out when are flags going to be planted in the ground, and how specific are those flags going to be in order to start to make a pitch to the electorate?
Yeah, I saw quite a lot of this over the last few months that's written about, and it's having never been in cabinet before, and it's interesting how what is said in the room is very different to what is reported. And so what we did a few weeks ago, what Kemi did a few weeks ago, was that she wanted to be clear with colleagues in shadow cabinet, and then we've gone round a lot in the party and talked about the high level plan. And the high level plan is 3 phases, which is the thing that you were just referencing, but has been mangled by journalists. Hi to the journalists on the call.
And probably even more mangled by me, sorry.
You made a good job of it based on the mangling which had come out via various journalists. Basically, we said that there are broadly 3 phases that we want to go through. The first one is restoring trust or regaining trust, that you're just not going to get a hearing until people are willing to listen to recognize that the party's changed, that things are going to be different. So there's a lot of focus in the first year going on trying to regain trust, then restoring credibility. So that's about saying okay, we've said that we know this didn't work. We're showing you that we're doing a lot of work to try and restore trust, and that here's some more information about that. And then the third year is, or the third phase is, getting ready. So that's about being ready for the election, whenever Starmer wants to call it.
Mhm.
How that was reported was, oh, that means we're not actually going to do any policy until 2027, and then it's the reports on the reports move it from that to actually nothing for 2 years and all the rest of it, which is never the argument. So all we're saying is we take this in phases. Those phases are not discrete. We're not pushing policy off until the end. I mean, some of you may already have seen the announcement a few weeks ago on indefinite leave to remain, a hard cap on migration numbers. So, policy has happened already. It happened relatively quickly after Kemi got elected in terms of the cap on the hard cap on numbers, and it will continue to happen. But as a fundamental, right now, the emphasis is on that trust starting to regain the trust, and then over time, we will build up a policy prospectus which, when people start being willing to trust us again, that they'll be willing to look at. If we do it the other way around, if we run out a load of policy now, I mean, one, the analysis hasn't been done on the policy, the plans won't be there, so it'd probably be wrong in certain instances or not working. And two, if you don't go through that sort of hoop of people feeling like the Conservative Party's changed, hearing that we've changed, showing that we've changed, they won't listen to it anyway. So that's the theory. We're not saying we have all the answers. One of the reasons I'm here today is, I'm a party member of 20 years. I got very frustrated when tablets were handed out on high from the leadership. That's exactly the opposite of what we want to do. We want to hear people's thoughts and views and ideas. But we're just trying to say, we have to take this in stages, and there's an emphasis at each stage.
So Bruce Goodwin asked an interesting question, which maybe is the elephant in the room. Good evening, Bruce. He says, whilst it's understandable that detailed policy this far ahead of an election may not be a good idea, we should be far more forceful in expressing broad policy objectives and beliefs. Would you agree? Then says, one suspects that it is not a desire to prevent promising things that can't be delivered, as much as a reluctance to challenge internal factions for what we admit we got wrong. He doesn't mention this exactly, so I'm inferring a bit too much. But as I discussed with you face to face, it seems to me that there are certain, albeit controversial, positions that one could take around, let's say, should we leave the European Convention of Human Rights and repeal the Human Rights Act? Should we abandon the carbon net zero target by 2050? Which are positions that still allow a huge amount of room for detailed policy. Leaving the ECHR is not an immigration policy of itself. It would solve nothing. Abandoning the carbon net zero target in 2050 raises a whole load of questions still about what you would do with renewables, if anything, what you would do about fracking, if anything. And we're going to do a couple of polls of the audience here. Do you think we should be trying to move to those taking positions on things like ECHR and carbon net zero? Or do you think that we should just sort of spend a lot of time before we even decide about that?
So we absolutely intend to move more into this area. I hope much as it's a challenge sometimes to get airtime in opposition, and we're trying to learn how to do that better and how to ensure that we're communicating a Conservative message to the electorate and to members. In the past few months, we've been clear that we'll reverse a load of Labour's tax changes, APR, BPR, etc. We started talking about something which people were very reluctant to talk about outside of towards the end, where Rishi and Suella talked a little bit about it on grooming gangs and all, and the absolute scandal that was. We've come out with an extremely high level but clear policy about caps on migration and about changing the pathway to citizenship, so the pull isn't there. So we've already done some of that, but there's obviously more to do, and we will continue to come out with those both positions and policies at an appropriate pace. But I think the thing, if you take one of those as an example, so ECHR, I'm on public record as saying I'm pretty sympathetic to leaving the ECHR. So it's not that I have a personal problem with this. The thing is, and I saw lots of hearts about this when you were talking about it. So I'm probably
just if they love me, they might not love my.
I'm sure that's I'm probably a fellow traveller on this. I think there is a strong case for doing that. But nobody went into politics. Nobody went into politics, or very few people went into politics, and gets up on a Monday and goes, I want to leave the ACHR because I want to leave the ACHR. You know, it's not the thing. The reason we were all looking at the ACHR is because it's a function of a broader question. It's a function of a question about how politicians have the ability to decide in this country, and it's a concern about borders, not just borders, but it's a concern about other things as well. And the thing that Kemi has always been very clear about is, you know, she could say tomorrow we're going to leave the ACHR. You know, she said in numerous places it may not be radical enough. We need to think about it. You know, we may lean in that direction, but she's not confirmed it, because if we say we come out of the ECHR tomorrow, win an election on Tuesday, we come out of the ECHR on Wednesday, and actually the thing on migration and borders, which is so important to this country, to actual faith in democracy, isn't fixed on Friday, because we haven't worked out how the ECHR interacts with the Refugee Convention, and we haven't worked out how borders and migration interacts with ECAT. We haven't worked out how domestic law is also doing quite a lot of this. We haven't worked out why Sweden can be in the ECHR and remove 70% of failed asylum seekers, whereas we only somehow managed to do 30. Now, I know that's not the most exciting statement in the world, but it's because we are tired as a group of either politicians or former politicians of doing press release politics. And the absolute death of politics is press release politics. It's killing us. And what we've got to do is we've got to have the ability to be able, when we say something, we mean it, and we've thought it through, and we understand the implications, and we can actually do it. And that's the thing which we need to work through. So I know many of you will be very, very keen on individual policies to make progress as quickly as possible. And you know, we've said we want to move to a clear conservative alternative in the way that we all join this party. But some of these things are just going to take time. And I know the leader is going to say some stuff on this, not on ECHR specifically, but he's going to say some stuff about the policy development process very soon to explain more about how we do this.
Okay. The trust point, we've had a couple of interesting interjections. Policies are all very well, says Donald Mackenzie. We usually end up with a good hand of Conservative policies. Our problem is trust, more of a statement than the question. Jane Kendricks says, do we need a modern day equivalent of the right approach? That was 1976 CCHQ's statement of Conservative aims. And Jane Potter asks, could Lee outline what they are doing to regain trust in the first phase? Or do you think you have to just sort of sit it out a bit, that, you know, the electorate just don't want to hear from us for another 6 months or so? Or is there something that can actually be done to re-engage them?
So on the right approach, that was one of our seminal texts that we were reviewing when we got in Alex Burghardt, who was a member partner for Brentwood and Ongar, former junior minister, who is leading on the policy development process for Kemi. He walks around with it under his arm, and he has been very clear that he thinks this is a hugely seminal text for how Conservative Party in the past regenerated and renewed. So we're definitely looking at those kind of foundational questions. But this is no longer confidential, but next Tuesday we will be launching our policy development process. Invitations have started to go out, so it's not confidential any longer. So the leader will be outlining more about the process in 8 days' time, in just over a week. And then on trust, that's a very difficult question, a very interesting one. You know, there's lots of political scientists around the world who have paid lots of money to try and work out how that happens. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to recognise the decision that has been made, which is what we were talking about a few minutes ago. You've got to accept the hand that has been dealt with, that you've been dealt with by the electorate. No point arguing with them. I happen to think they were right on a personal level, but there's no point arguing with them. And then you have to demonstrate that you're changing the party in a way which reflects what the electorate want. Now, part of that is, you know, Kemi is saying at points, you know, she said in November, December, we got immigration wrong, you know, that we made mistakes on immigration, you know, is being clear and honest with that. So part of it is to, you know, is just to speak plainly about some of this stuff. The second thing is Kemi's out on the road. We don't shout about it. We don't scream about it. But Kemi is out on the road every week talking to people. trying to build back up the case again for conservatism in individual communities.
Why don't you shout about it? I want you to shout
Well,
about it.
we may well do so, but at the moment we're trying to do the hard work of trying to just get back out there and do it, and then we're also doing the hard work of trying to rebuild the party. And there's quite a lot of changes going on in central office at the moment to be able to do that. So there's a lot of foundation stones being put in, and hopefully trust comes from that. But ultimately it's going to be about showing, not telling, because people are tired of politicians turning up and saying, we're going to do this, it's going to be wonderful, brilliant, let's do it. They actually want to understand how you're going to do it, not just what you're going to do.
Lee, there's been loads of questions about party unity and what some people are describing in the chat about what to do about the Lib Dems in the Tory party. But let me take one from Richard Patient. Is it desirable to have a united party, or should we accept that having policy positions may mean that some of our members may have to join the Lib Dems or leave? There's a balance to be struck here. I'm not suggesting we should manufacture a fight, Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. So what happens if you manufacture a fight? But going forward, you see we're going to have to place some pretty clear stakes in the ground that might not be entirely acceptable to 100% of people who are presently Conservative Party members, or indeed to all 121 who are presently members of the Conservative Parliamentary Party.
So two things on that. Firstly, Kemi ran and won a leadership election on the basis of going back to first principles. And there's a set of core principles of conservatism: hard work, ambition, aspiration, a state that does things well, not lots of things badly, independence from the state where as possible, support for the vulnerable where is needed. All of those things which brought us all into low tax, small state, etc. All of those things which brought us into conservative politics in the first instance. We're deadly serious about trying to build policies on that prospectus, because it is the place where we think the strongest communities and the strongest societies and the strongest countries can be built from. And Kemi's unashamed about that. If you're a communist in the Conservative Party, you probably shouldn't be in the Conservative Party. They're just a set of core beliefs which people have to have. And if the Conservative Party in the future, elected a leader which was socialist, I wouldn't be in the Conservative Party. But I'm in the Conservative Party because I believe in conservatism with a small c, and as does Kemi. But I think the broader point here is the Conservative Party can only be successful, and the Conservative Party can only win elections by appealing to a broad range of the country and winning 326 seats, ideally some more, in order to have a working majority. And that requires us to ensure that we have a broad coalition, a broad range, and that we're talking to the country in a way which they want to hear and they want to listen to. And the fundamental is, if you look at what happened in July, people left us and went into all directions. They stayed at home, they went to Reform, they went to the Lib Dems, some of them went to Labour, some of them even went to Greens in places like Waveney Valley and elsewhere. And if you look at the work that the CPS have done as an example, when they've gone through and talked to people about why they left because they'd had enough of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party hadn't done what they said they'd do. But that means we've got to get people back from Labour, the Greens, Lib Dems, Reform, and from the sofa. So it means that we've got to appeal to all of those people. I don't actually think there's that much difference in terms of what a lot of them think, but it means we have to have a broad appeal and try and win back from a broad section of the ideological spectrum.
Yeah, do you think there is a danger of that having your cake and eating it a bit? I mean, Etheridge says it's the probable collapse into civil war of reform, a chance to take a deep breath, relax, and rely on the centrist managerial approach of the last government? Or is it an opportunity to become the kind of party that will encourage voters and activists to return with a focus on controlling immigration, patriotism, lower taxes, and exploring the opportunities from Brexit? I mean, I might be singing my own tune, hooting my own horn here. I would say broadly, if you look at the last election, whilst yes, no doubt there were some defections to the Greens, but the biggest shift in votes was the Conservatives losing votes and Reform picking them up. I mean, it's an exaggeration to say everything else was static, but there wasn't a sort of massive forward leap in the Liberal Democrat vote. They were gaining seats because the Conservative vote was melting away to Reform, and that was enough for them to win in a lot of the shires. The big shift was Reform up enormously compared to the Brexit Party and us down on our 2019 vote share. So isn't like stage one. I mean, obviously you want everybody to vote for you can possibly appeal to. But if you won back the reform vote, you're a long way to being in a position to win an election outright, right?
So there's, I mean, if you take North East Derbyshire, for example, sorry to keep going back to parochial matters, but my home, where my heart is, in 2019, I polled, thanks to the national success of the Conservative Party, not just me, but I polled nearly 29,000 votes, and I managed 16, I think, or something this time. A massive drop off, and 8,000 of those looked as though well, 8,000, Reform appeared with 8,000 votes. Some will have come from me, some will have come from Labour. Labour only, I think, put on about 1,000 votes. I dropped by 12, 13. There's clearly a group of people who sat at home. So, there's lots of movement around. The fundamental is that we have to and we should want to make the case to people who have voted Reform, both in 2019 and who are indicating they might consider, 2024, and who are indicating they might want to do it again. The people who are voting Reform because they're very frustrated with the system. They're very frustrated that they've repeatedly sent a set of politicians to Westminster to vote for lower migration, and we've ended up with higher migration. They are very, very, very frustrated with the fact that they voted politicians in for better public services, for more effective public services, and public services look as though they have not got not as effective as they could be. Now, there may be some very good reasons for the latter. I don't think there's any particularly good reasons for the former, to be honest, on a personal level. But so you've got to give people hope. And you've got to give people hope on the basis of something that will actually work. I think the thing which would just be so destructive to our country is if we promise the earth, tomorrow, in a month, in 6 months' time, in 2 years' time, whatever the frequency is, whatever the sequencing is, and we didn't know how to do it. We got there, and it all fell apart within 6 months because we'd overpromised, we underdelivered, and I just think there's a group of people in this country who just they can't see that again. They're holding on for dear life here with their fingertips about how democracy matters, and we've got to show them it does again.
Just on the very straw poll we've taken, that Peter Snow would have just said, it's a bit of fun. It's a bit of fun. We're not suggesting that this is representative of the wider electorate. But on ECHR, Lee, how much do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The Conservative Party should commit now to leaving the ECHR. But those on the call strongly agree, 43%, agree, 23%, don't know or it's too early to say, 30%, disagree, 4%, strongly disagree, 0%. Net zero, how much do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The Conservative Party should commit now to abandoning current net zero targets. Strongly agree, 65%, agree, 23%, don't know, too early to say, 7%, disagree 4%, and strongly disagree 1%. Again, it's a straw poll and a self-selecting audience to some degree, but I thought that might be of interest. I want to move on a bit because there's a lot of questions about this, and I know this might be more the remit of, let's say, Nigel Huddleston or Dominic Johnson. Dominic Johnson's joining us next month for one of these conversations. On the party itself, sort of CCHQ, the role of members in the party, there's quite a few questions here, which I think are a bit interlinked, and I hope you can engage with them, Lee. Dinah Glover asks, how would Lee reform the candidates list and selection? Ashley Bauer-Dyke asks, Lee, given the importance of getting candidates out, engaging with voters as early as possible, when can associations expect to begin the selection process for parliamentary candidates? We've seen in past elections that early selection helped build strong local collections and momentum. Charles Breeze asks, Lee, how does the party envisage making membership more meaningful? Currently, communications feels very one way. Mike Fairhurst asks, when are you going to engage with local associations? John Strafford, how do you close the gap between the views of the parliamentary party and the voluntary party? And when will you return the voluntary party those rights that they had before 1998? I mean, there's quite a move which broadly PopCon endorses, but was kicked off. I mean, John Strafford, who asked that last question, has been one of the big movers and shakers behind it, about whether the Conservative Party has become somewhat hollowed out because the membership has limited say in what actually happens in their patch. We've obviously got the decision in the leadership election. It's probably been far too many leadership elections over the past few years, but nevertheless, when there is one, the members get a say. But when you see the sight, look, I've got nothing against Richard Holden personally. I've never met him. Of a safe Conservative seat being held back, and then lo and behold, the incumbent chairman of the party appears on a shortlist of one. As it happens, he just won the seat by 20 votes. I can't speak to his, whether he's the appropriate candidate there, but I mean that just doesn't look right, yeah. And we had the sight of David Frost not being able to get on the candidates list. It seems to me quite extraordinary. I don't know anything about his background. It seems that, PopCon campaigns quite a lot against the quangocracy in Britain, but on occasions, you sort of get the feel that CCHQ operates a bit like a quango, rather than the sort of support centre of a democratic grassroots political party.
So there's a lot there, and I think probably quite a lot of it, if it's okay, Dominic, is probably best to answer. So hopefully not too many more weeks before that's possible. Let me pick up a few things on that. There is clearly a need to look at how our candidate processes work. One, because that's a good thing to do every so many years before we start again, and two, because that's a discussion that we hear very regularly at regional conferences, when we speak to the National Convention, and Kemi has heard that on a number of occasions. And I think we will hear more on that in the coming weeks and months ahead. Early selection. I mean, I'm personally a beneficiary of early selection, in that my own journey to Westminster, I think, was arguably helped by the fact I was selected 2.5 years out before the 2015 election. I lost the 2015 election, but it allowed me to do 2.5 years of embedding within the constituency, so that when national situation changed in 2017, we were able to flip the seat over. So there is a lot to be said for that. We've also got to make sure that that's balanced off with, 4 years is a long time, and a lot of time to people dedicate their lives and their livelihoods and the impact on their families and things like that. So we've got to work through all of that with the voluntary party and their representatives, National Convention, and the people who work that through. So there's a lot of discussion that needs to be done around that in the weeks and months ahead. In terms of membership being made more meaningful, this is a really interesting one, because I think Kemi has a lot of sympathy with that, and we have a lot of sympathy with that. And I hope you've started to see slight teeny changes around the edges on this, and we welcome your feedback on it. In that, the constant begging emails for money have slowed down, because that was one of the first things that Kemi said when she became leader. Slow it down, please. And that, in fairness, that means we raise less money. But we took clear steer from when Kemi was going around the hustings and the events. People said, knock it off. It's too much at the moment. So we've slowed it down. That's point one. Point two, I hope for those of you who haven't sort of consigned the Conservative Party's emails to your junk or to whatever, some random bit of your inbox, we have started putting out a weekly email on a Friday, which does a roundup of what is happening. And that's directly as a result of members saying, I want you to put in one place what we're doing and give us some ideas about how we can make the case for conservatism in our area. So we've done that. And thirdly, we started these online meetings where Shadow Cabinet comes. Andrew Griffiths was there last week. So I hope you can see, we're testing it all out. We're trying it out. Some things will work, some things won't. But we're trying to take the feedback from you all, and it will take time, and, it won't be perfect, but to try to change things and improve it. So I hope that's a bit of a down payment on trying to make members more involved, because it's your party, and we have to try and reflect that in how the next few years happen.
Yeah, I would notice, I do read all the stuff that comes through, and I would agree with you, it has improved. There still seems to be quite often I'm being asked for money or to buy ceramics. That seems to be the other key thing as well. Actually, I'm a bit frustrated with myself. I wanted to buy those Margaret Thatcher mugs, and I think I missed the opportunity, so I can't really complain about the email. Well, I would have appreciated a reminder, actually, in that particular case.
I can't win sometimes.
Yeah, so it's always a balance, really. Well, I want to. I might fire a few random questions at you that have been in the chat, Lee. But what do you? I should ask you what you make of this fallout in reform, because a real difference between the various other times when the Conservative parties had to rebuild. Certainly, there was a major intellectual rebuilding after 1974 with Keith Joseph and Margaret Thatcher, plugged into a lot of free market think tanks in resetting what the Tory party stood for. From 1997, there was a colossal structural rebuild that was needed, having got eviscerated at the 1997 election, and then actually struggling to make much headway for a very long period of time. And it seems that you've actually got, if you like, both the 1974 challenge and the 1997 challenge on your plate at the same time, with the added complication that there's additional competition. You said right at the top of the show, politics is very volatile, but it is an unusual phenomenon in British politics that there's another party, which I guess you broadly say is on the right of centre, that is competing for votes with the Conservative Party. That's just not been a phenomenon in our lifetimes. What's your thinking and strategy about how we approach that? I mean, I think I can recall an interview that Kemi did some time ago. She referenced the tale of the hare and the tortoise and actually suggested that, the tortoise won the race and there might be a lesson in that. Have recent events proven that to be true? Is reform a castle built on sand and actually it will just collapse under its own contradictions? Appreciate you don't want to intrude too much in private grief, but I suppose, would you like Great Yarmouth, the MP for Great Yarmouth, to be sitting in the Conservative interest again rather than in the reform interest? We should be taking opportunities to win back people at every chance we get, right?
I mean, I wish we'd not lost the Great Yarmouth seat from the Conservative interest in the first place, as the other 250 seats as well. But we are where we are. I think Kemi has said we're Conservatives, right? We welcome competition, and that's not a throwaway line. We really do. Competition makes people better versions of themselves. And the thing the Conservative Party needs to be is it needs to be the best Conservative party that it can be. It needs to be the best version of itself. We are clearly not that and have not been so for some time. And we're trying to put in place these foundational changes which will allow us to start getting back to that and showing people that we are serious about returning to government again. Reform will do their thing, and they're very effective at certain parts of it, and there's gaps in other parts of it and all that stuff, and we'll let them work all that through. But our job is to sort this party out, get it working again for its members and its communities, and then get it putting forward a prospectus for government that can win 326 plus seats and start changing this country in a Conservative direction of the vandalism that the Labour Party are doing at the moment. But whenever I just say this, a couple of things on reform, if I may. Reform are competing for Conservative votes. Reform are not a Conservative party. If you go and look at their manifesto, the contract thing that they said in July, long on problem definition, a lot of the problem definition, which I think many of us here and elsewhere in the party could agree, short on Conservative outcomes, and very much short on a plan to deliver Conservative outcomes. And so, when I hear good Conservatives go to reform, I respect everybody's right to make their own decisions. But when I hear good Conservatives going to reform, I scratch my head because they're not offering a Conservative prospectus, a truly Conservative perspectives. And
I think they are offering a Conservative analysis that they've been sort of, they seem to be much better at taking positions than actually having developed policy. But it's a big problem that the judges are overreaching, that the ECHR binds our hands, that the Human Rights Act is being overinterpreted. I know the Conservatives are now caught up with that. The carbon net zero is crazy and bankrupting us. That the political establishment is completely broken. And I would agree with you that when you actually ask what's the recipe for turning that round, they're rather less detailed. But you can see how that cri de coeur appeals to people of a Conservative bent, right?
Yeah, and I understand why, the people I know, people I've worked with, people I've been in the battle lines and as a Conservative for many years. There's a number of them who currently are either supporting reform or have moved over to reform. I hope we can win them back. We seek converts. And so there is a lot of work to do. But I think the more we go through this process, the more it will be clear that whilst there's probably a shared overlap of problem to some extent, the actual solutions aren't there, and they're certainly not conservative in a number of instances, and they are certainly without a plan in others. And the final thing is just, reform's application form for local government, as I understand it, until quite recently, presumably until somebody pointed it out and they changed it, said, we welcome people from the left, the right, and the centre. Well, if you build a political party of people from the left, the right, and the centre, then that may work for a little bit, but it will collapse on itself because you cannot govern from the left, the right, and the centre simultaneously. So, our job is, I don't want to spend too much time critiquing or commenting on reform, but just put those 2 points out there. Our job as Conservatives, be the best version of ourselves.
Let me just finish with what we can look forward to then, Lee. Maybe you can just reiterate that you said, I think, was it next Tuesday or something, there's going to be an announcement about the policy. Where can people find out more about that? And then there's been quite a few questions, I'll just box them together, about looking forward a bit further to May. I mean, this is quite a tricky set of elections for us because it was such a high watermark when these elections were last fought, and therefore people always compare to when the last cycle came. But when the last cycle came, the Conservatives are on a real high. What can we expect here from the leadership about what our broad proposition will be to the electorate in May, appreciating that, there's going to be a huge array of different, local issues in local areas, but what are you expecting the national message to be as to why you should vote for the Conservative ticket in May?
And taking those in reverse order. So, the May elections are a challenge, and we've been clear about that. Things don't improve overnight, and things often take time to improve. That's always the case when people have come out of government. But particularly these elections in May, I think it's something like we hold something around 60% of the seats. We have responsibility for almost all of the county councils out there. And we're going to fight extremely hard to try and retain as many seats as we can and to try and retain as many councils as we can. But it's going to be a real challenge. So my message and Kemi's message through me is that if you want to make sure that the Conservative interest is best represented in local government, we've got to try and win as many of those seats and as many of those councils again as we possibly can from a very high base. And anything we can do, I know people are exhausted, I know people are tired, I know people are still frustrated over last year, but this is where the rubber hits the road. And the reality is we still want Staffordshire, Derbyshire, Lincolnshire, Kent, Devon, Cornwall, all of these to still have good Conservative councils delivering good Conservative policies. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. But it's in a challenging environment, and Kemi has said that, and we will do our best to ensure that happens. And then finally, on policy commissions, more information next Tuesday. For those of you who are members and who received the emails, there will be more information in that, both in the days leading up to it and then immediately after it. We're really looking forward to members getting involved in this because it is vital that we show people that we're really serious about revitalising our policy perspectives. We have the intellectual energy and the curiosity to do that so that we have Conservative solutions for 2030s. And then people, hopefully, that's the first step to people trusting us again and considering voting for us.
Yeah, my tip, not that I'm that seasoned a campaigner, but out knocking doors in local election campaigning, is the best way once you've engaged a voter in discussion is not to ask them whether they voted for us at the election, but to ask them whether they typically lean in our direction. I think I found a lot of people who then, well, I did find a lot of people who confessed to me that they did not vote for us in the July general election, but do indeed typically lean in our direction. And it seems to me winning that cohort back has got to be a pretty early priority for the party. That will help us rebuild. Lee, we've overrun our hour. Thanks to all of you who asked questions. I know some of you in the chat complaining I couldn't get through them all. We've had over 150 people on the call. We had 86 questions still unanswered. I got through as many of them as I could and tried to batch the themes as best I could. Lee, I hope that's given you some food for thought on feedback from the grassroots. Really appreciate you taking the time. Or I said at the top of the show that I thought you could put your feet up and confidently predict victory. I know it does not work that way, and you're an incredibly busy man.
Every minute and for every vote. But thank you to PopCons for having me.
Really, really important, and do keep in touch. And you know, we're really keen to feed into the leadership team. You know what we think. We know we won't always get our way, but we'll, I hope, put all of our ideas on policy and party reform in as constructive and useful fashion as we can, because we wish both you and Kemi and the team at the top were very best. Lee, an absolute pleasure. I should just leave you with the last bit of feedback. We did ask people right at the end whether they, to the extent to which they agree or disagree with the following statement: there needs to be a full overhaul of CCHQ and major democratisation of the Conservative Party. I think you'll be unsurprised about these results. Strongly agree 74%, agree 20%, don't know, too early to say 0%, disagree 6%, don't know, interesting, and strongly disagree 0%. So amongst the cohort of 150 or so who've been on this call, there's a pretty decisive appetite for change in that direction, which we look forward to raising with Dominic Johnson when we speak to him next month. Lee, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Do sign up for our upcoming Pop Conversations. Make sure you're receiving our newsletter. Onwards, upwards. My thanks again to Lee Rowley for an hour of his time. Been really, really useful, Lee. Thanks. You've been a star. Have a terrific night, everybody. Over and out.